Hi everybody, Marty Rubin, and I'm back for another segment of Marty's Corner. And today is a very special day. I have, and the Argyle Theater has, Art Shamsky from the 1969 Miracle Mets. Art, welcome.
It's great to be here.
So listen, this is Marty's Corner, and that may sound familiar. Like I know there was Kindness Corner
Is it
back
similar
in the
to
day.
Kindness Corner?
It's, well, let's put it this way. I don't have the stars of the Met game on. I have Art Shamsky.
Well, you got
and I know you guys got watches back in the day. I think.
I don't know about watches. We got milk little certificates, and, some
milk.
gasoline.
Well, no milk or watches from me,
Yeah.
but
they were wonderful experiences being there with Ralph, and obviously you were there because you did something well in the game. And
exactly, it was
so
fun.
that was always fun.
It was a fun show.
And Ralph, I ended up working with him for a few years, broadcasting the Mets games.
Yeah.
And he was a wonderful person to be around, but he was also a great player. I watched him as a kid growing up.
Tremendous
with
player.
the Pirates, and what a home run hitter he
Oh my
was.
God, fantastic.
But he was a
Over
terrific
50 home runs
broadcaster.
he hit one year.
Yeah, and he was a terrific broadcaster, and his knowledge and his stories were just infamous. And,
Yes,
and
yes.
I remember when I was working with him, I always looked forward to hearing what he had to say about
Right.
when he played and
Oh my God.
things
You,
that went
you
on in
know,
the game.
I grew up in Flushing, Queens, so this is an absolute thrill. You know, I'm a lifelong Met fan. It's a thrill to be interviewing you. So it's so much fun. I have so much to ask you, but we can't. You know, so let's get to it. So in 1968, you were traded to the Mets. The Mets were not a very good team since their inception. They started to get a little bit better when they got Gil Hodges as the manager, but they weren't very good yet. In your wildest dreams, could you have ever imagined that a year later you'd be world champs?
Well, when I first heard I got traded to the Mets, it was a little bit, it was the first time you get traded. I was with the Reds for a long time.
Right.
Came up with some great players. It was the prelude to the Big Red Machine, which is a great team
What a
in the
team.
'70s. I came up with Rose, Pete Rose, and Tony Perez, and Lee May, and Tommy Helms, Tommy Harper. I came up when Frank Robinson was on the team, and Vada Pinson, and Tommy Harper. Just great players with the Cincinnati organization. And when I got a call from Bing Devine, well, actually I got a call from Bob Howsam, who was the general manager of the Reds at the time, and I had just gotten hurt in that year, 1967, and was coming off an operation on my back, and I thought he was calling to see how I was feeling. And,
No.
Before he could say anything, I said, "Mr. Howsam, I'm feeling great. I'm looking forward to the next season." Well, he said, "That's good because we just traded you to the New York Mets." Well,
Right.
when I've heard the Mets, getting traded for the first time is always a shock. You're leaving
Yes.
friends, it's a whole new thing for you. But when I heard the Mets, my first reaction was, I didn't like New York. It was too big. Even though I came from a big city.
Well, that certainly changed because you lived there for a long time.
I've been there a long time, but
Yeah.
that changed October 16th, 1969.
Oh yeah.
But when I first heard about it, it was a little bit of a shock, and so once that passed and I heard it was the Mets and I got through that a little bit, he said that Bing Devine would be giving me a call, and I knew Bing Devine because as a kid growing up in St. Louis, he was the general manager of the Cardinals when I was very young, and I knew him and I had met him, and so he called me and he said, "Look, we've been trying to get you in a trade," and he made me feel really good about the trade. And
So you settled down and said, "Oh,
well, I did
I'm coming."
until the next 2 days later, I read in the paper that he left the Mets and came back to the Cardinals as general manager. So I was the last trade he made before he left to come back to the Cardinals. But in retrospect, coming over and spending that first year, 1968, that was Gil Hodges. You mentioned Gil Hodges. That was his first year. My first year, Tommy Agee, Al Weiss, J.C. Martin, a lot of new players came to the Mets. And even though in '68 we didn't do really well, we finished ninth, a half game out of last place.
Better than the last place that you were doing before that.
Yeah, yeah. I can't take the blame for those early years.
Yes,
in the
right.
Mets, though. I really feel like when you played the Mets back in those days, if you didn't win 2 out of 3 games, it was a bad series.
And then when Seaver came, it changed.
changed.
But let me just ask you, so you wrote a terrific book, After the Miracle. I read that book.
Thank you.
I didn't read that book, I devoured that book.
Thank you very much.
Can you tell the fans what that was about, After the Miracle?
Well, I really believe that the New York Mets, 1969 Mets in particular, have had more books written about them than any sports team in the history of sports. I really believe that. I don't know the number, but there's so many books have been written about that team. And when we were getting close to the 50th anniversary, I'd written one other book called the magnificent seasons about 1969 when the Jets won,
Right.
we won, and then the New York Knicks won in May of '70.
What a year that was.
And all for the first time. So
Yeah.
it was really an unusual series of events. And so I wanted to do something different because what can you write about 1969 that hasn't been written about? And so I wrote the book with Eric Sherman, and who's written a number of books and written books on Mets, including one on Mookie Wilson, the 1986 Mets. And so he knew Met history. And we sat around one day and I said, you know, I don't want to just write about that season and what happened because everybody knows for the most part what happened.
Right.
So we decided to write about the friendships that had developed with the players over the years. And part of the reason that it turned out so good and made the New York Times best-selling list is because we really delved into these relationships that the players had. And
Right.
what's interesting about that is that the guys who were there early, like guys like Eddie Kranepool and Tug McGraw and Ronnie Swoboda,
Right.
who had seen so many bad years with the Mets prior to 1969. And so what that did, us winning in 1969 was really not only an unbelievable feat, but because we were such a bad team in those early years, and
Right.
because we were still a bad team in 1968, I think we weren't expected to do anything in 1969, maybe improve a little bit.
Right.
And then to turn it around and win a World Series, we made people feel better about their lives.
Oh, yeah.
And I think people remember that, pass that on from generation to generation.
Now, in
but
that-
the book, but
yeah.
I just might finish
Yeah.
the book. The book was really about the relationships that developed
Yes.
from that team, from being on bad teams to being on a great
Right.
team.
And a road
Service.
trip that you
And
took
it still maintained, we
with-
still maintained the relationship.
Right, you took a road trip with Bud Harrelson, Jerry Kuzman, and Ron Swoboda to see Tom Seaver at his vineyard in California.
Well, we knew that when we started doing these interviews that in my mind, I just didn't want to do an interview with Tom over the phone, Tom Seaver.
Right.
He was sorry, we knew he was ill, and even though you could talk to him on the phone, I thought it was important to be face to face with him.
Right.
He wasn't traveling anymore, so we
Right.
decided to take a couple of the players, I think myself, Swoboda, Jerry Kuzman, and Buddy Harrelson, who had just announced that he was in early stages of
Right.
Alzheimer's. And so I thought it would be therapeutic because they were roommates, Tom and,
Yes.
and Buddy, on the road, and grew up in California, both of them. So I made the trip, and the reality of it was we didn't even know if we'd be able to see Tom, because when I talked to him, he said, yeah, come on out, I'll be glad to see you. But when I talked to his wife, she said, you know, I come all the way out here and you might not be feeling too good.
Wow.
So we rolled the dice. We guys came from different areas. Buddy, myself, and Eric Sherman came out on the same plane, and Jerry Kuzman came from Minneapolis, and Ron Swoboda came from New Orleans, and we had to coordinate it. We got to San Francisco, and then had to go up to Napa, California, which is about an hour
Right,
and a half.
it was Vineyard. Was.
Yeah, it was Vineyard, but when we got there, it was late afternoon, on Friday afternoon, and I called, and Nancy Seaver said, you know, he's not feeling too good, and which was really a difficult situation for us, but we said, how about tomorrow? And she said, well, let's hope tomorrow he feels better, because Sunday was not gonna be good. This would have been Saturday,
Right.
because we all had to leave early to catch connecting flights. So Saturday was the only day we could do it, and we lucked out. The next day I called, she said, get over here as soon as you can.
Great.
And then we spent 8 or 9 hours with Tom looking
Wow,
over his
that's
property.
great.
Went into the village to have lunch, and we reminisced about how important 1969 to us
Yeah.
personally and professionally, and what it meant to all of us as a close unit, and
Yes.
the friendships that we developed and still maintain.
That last chapter in the book was so touching. When Tom Seaver passed away, I reread the last chapter. I was very emotional reading that last chapter. It must have been bittersweet for you.
Well, it's exactly the right word. When we left, after we had this wonderful time and had lunch and we said goodbye, on a personal level, I thought that it was very sad for me, because who knew what was going to happen? And as it turned out, he passed away, about a year later, year and a half
Yeah.
later. And so, and as I've always gotten older, and all of us of age, it's reality.
You're forever young to me. Let me tell you
Well,
that.
thanks. We've lost a number of players on that team,
Yeah.
including our manager Gil Hodges, and some great players. Tommy Agee, and
He died very young.
Don Clendon and Tug McGraw.
I know.
I mean, all these wonderful players. Don Cardwell, Cal Kuntz. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
But when I left, we left that meeting with Tom. It was bittersweet, because
You knew it. You knew it might
we
be
just
it.
didn't know. But the book was really about about the camaraderie and the friendships, and I think people appreciated it. The first chapter was about going out there, and the last chapter was about coming back.
Fantastic. It was such a good book. Before you got to the '69 World Series against the big bad Baltimore Orioles, there was a National League Series against the Atlanta Braves with immortal Hall of Famer Henry Aaron leading the way there. Someone had an unbelievable series. Who might that have been, Art, you know?
Thank you for bringing it up. I had 7 hits and 13 at-bats. I had 3 the first game, 3 the next. And
538.
yeah, and we swept
Batting
them.
average.
You know what's interesting about that series is you were right, Henry Aaron, but they had such a great team: Felipe Lou, Henry Aaron, Rico Cardi, Orlando Cepeda.
Yeah.
I mean,
They
their
were loaded.
lineup was
They were
full.
loaded.
They didn't have the pitching that we had, and as it turned out, our pitchers, including Seaver and Kuzman and Gentry, did not pitch well.
No.
And they
You
gave up
needed
a lot
all
of
the runs
and
to score.
we needed to score some runs, and I had a really good series, and thank you, and I appreciate it.
You would have been, you know, it's funny. There was no MVP in the
No.
National League Series. Hands down, you would have been the MVP. Does that ever bother you, thinking that there wasn't an MVP?
You know what
then?
bothers me more, to be perfectly honest, I made the last out of the first game of the World Series that we lost, and then we won the next 4 in a row.
Yes.
And that last at-bat, I think about that at-bat every single day of my life. A pitch that I could have hit out of the ballpark. Mike Cuellar was the pitcher.
It was right in your
It was
zone.
right there, and I ended up grounding out to Davey Johnson, but I have the distinction of making the last out of the only game we lost in the World Series. But the playoffs for me, that was the first year of the playoffs, were really significant in a sense because people remember it, and
Right.
it was a great series. But the true thing about that team is that everybody contributed to the success.
It was a
of the
complete team.
And you know, you got on the whole roster of the players. At some point during the season, everybody helped out and helped us win.
You didn't play that much in the World Series because Gil Hodges believed in the platoon system. You know, really the only guys that played full-time was Tommy Agee, Cleon Jones, Jerry Grody, and Bud House, and all the other positions were platooned. You know, Clendenin with Kranepool, Ken Boswell with Al Weiss, you know, and you platooned with Ron Swoboda and Ray. So how did you handle, you were a lefty hitter and a really good hitter.
Thank you.
How did you handle when a left-handed pitcher was coming up? You knew you weren't going to play, and you might have been ripping the cover off the ball.
Yeah, it was a very difficult situation, and I can honestly tell you, and Ron Swoboda would say it, and Eddie Kranepool, and Wayne Garrett would say
Wayne Garrett and Ed Charles platooned also.
They will tell you that it was very difficult, and nobody liked it. It was very difficult. But we had the utmost respect for Gil Hodges, and it was working.
Yes.
And you don't change.
When you're
something that's
winning,
working.
you could swallow
And
it.
you
right?
look at the combined years. To look at myself and Swoboda had in right field, and Kranepool and Clendenin.
You hit 300 on the dot.
Yeah,
that year.
It was a good year, but it was frustrating. I mean, as you mentioned, I had a great playoff series against Atlanta, and then I don't start the first game of the World Series, but he sends me up to pinch hit against the left-hander.
Yes.
In the 9th inning with the
Which
the
is
game
that
on the
at-bat
line.
you were referring
Yeah,
to.
that's the at-bat I think about every
Right.
day. But you know what? It was a great year for me on a personal level. But you know, it's to be part of that team was very, very special. And
Yes.
and you know, I played 13 years, and nobody talks about the other 12.
Right.
It's really 1969.
It's a year to know. So you ended up staying in New York because at first you said you
the
weren't.
city that I didn't like.
Right.
I've been there over 50 years, so it's amazing what happens to you when you win a championship in New York City or any city, but New York City is definitely very special.
Right.
And that year was incredible with the Jets winning and us winning, and then the Knicks winning in May of the next year. And you know, it was just for me to be part of that team and to do things like I'm doing now, and coming to the Argyle Theater on the 10th.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, we could talk forever. I mean, I could sit and talk for hours with you, Art.
Well, you know what you're talking about. That's good.
So we have Sunday, October 10th at 7:30. Art Shamsky and Ed Kranepool are going to be here for a special night at the Argyle Theater. Could you give the fans a little taste of what's going to happen that night?
Well, I know, I don't speak for Eddie, but I know he would say the same thing. We never get tired of talking about 1969. And the fans love it because all the stories that we tell and all the things that they come back, it flashes in their mind. And even if they weren't born, they know about that team from their parents or their grandparents. And so for us to come out here in this beautiful theater, the Argyle Theater in Babylon, is going to be very special. And I hope the fans really want to talk to us and
sure
talk
they will.
about 1969. And you know, you can talk about the Black Cat, you can talk about Steve Carlton striking out in 19 against us and us winning the game. You can talk about Tom Seaver's almost perfect
would have hit 2 home runs that game.
That's right, and struck out the other 2 times.
Right. Nobody remembers the strikeouts.
Yeah, and all those wonderful things, but you never get tired of talking about it. And I know Eddie and I are going to be looking forward to being out here and hoping.
Right.
And you know what? The other thing about it is we get a chance to say hello to the fans. They can
Yes.
come up and talk to us and,
Right.
and ask questions that maybe they had never asked before.
Yes.
Never heard before.
Well, it's going to be a special night, and we have to save something for October 10th. You know, we can't. But whether you're a Met fan, we're accepting Yankee fans, okay, baseball fans, historians. That you got to come that night. It's going to be great. We can't wait for October 10th, Sunday at 7:30. So, Art, thank you so much for being on Marty's Corner, and we can't wait for October 10th.
This is just like Kiner's Corner. I feel great.
That's it. We don't have the jingle.
Where's my gift?
We'll see you all out here on October 10th.